Welcome to Holistic Health for Happy Kids, the podcast where we dive into the root causes of children's health challenges and explore natural solutions to help little ones thrive. I'm Lisa, a passionate pediatric naturopath and mum of 3, dedicated to empowering parents with practical tips and expert insights to raise healthy, happy kids. Each episode will unpack common childhood health concerns like allergies, eczema, fussy eating, and gut health, and share evidence-based advice to support your child's wellness naturally. Let's create a generation of thriving children, one holistic step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Holistic Health for Happy Kids. And today we're joined by Tracey Seymour, who is a mould inspector, Break The Mould Inspections. So hello, Tracey. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
If you've been a client of mine, you'll know that one question I ask everybody is, do you have any mould in your house? And when 99% of people say no, I say, have you got any leaks or water damage in your house? And then people go, oh, well, actually, yes. And so I'm super interested in mold because a few years ago, when one of my kids was having some skin issues that did not respond to all my naturopathic stuff, I really wrecked my brain about what else it could be. And I remembered that there had been a leak in her bedroom a few years beforehand. So we got a mold inspection, and her room and our roof space had, like, I don't know, 10 times the extreme cutoff of mold. And we
Okay.
had no idea. We couldn't smell it, we couldn't see it, nothing. So we had to fix the roof, we had to remediate the house, we had to change carpets, like we had to do it all.
Wow.
And, she recovered really quickly after that. So that's one reason why I'm so passionate about it. But Tracey, tell me, why are you so interested in mold?
Yeah. Look, anyone who knows me for long enough knew I definitely did not grow up wanting to be a mold inspector. It is not a glamorous job. I am, sort of crawling under people's houses and into roof cavities, into all sorts of glamorous situations. So, I definitely didn't want to be a mold inspector and didn't envisage this for my life. However, my son, who is now 8 and a bit, just before he turned 5, he was a very, very normal, healthy, happy boy. And quite literally overnight, it seemed he changed. So he started to develop what was the most obvious things. There were others, but the most obvious would be he developed neurological tics. So it started with hard eye blinking repetitively. And I guess not knowing anything about mold and, sort of what this could possibly be, we sort of thought, oh, maybe he's on the iPad too much. Maybe he's watching TV too much. So we started to pull those things back, and we noticed that still wasn't changing, and those tics became more aggressive. So they went from being a hard eye blinking to suddenly neck rolling and turning, which is really confronting. So as a mum watching your child do this, and it doesn't seem normal, it doesn't seem right, it's really, really hard to watch. So I took him to the GP, and she very flippantly blew it off as, oh, he's just developed a motor tic. Just ignore it. If it's still there in 12 months, he's probably got Tourette's. And I honestly remember it was like an out-of-body experience. The entire room just went silent, and I was just in this moment of thinking, what the heck? Are you kidding? And then there wasn't even any sort of support that if it was Tourette's, that here's what you would need to do and how we can support. It was just off you go. And I remember going home, and once I got out of the view of my son, I collapsed on the floor in tears. I was devastated. What does this mean for him? There's no support here. There's no way we can stop this. There was no guidance whatsoever or rhyme or reason. So, look, I am the kind of person who that sort of stuff doesn't sit right with me. I'm like a dog with a bone, and I will just continue until I can make sense of it in my own body and my own nervous system. So I did go about, sort of a lot of research online, and I'm talking, 9 o'clock at night till 3 a.m. sometimes, scrolling on Google, trying to find answers to tic disorders and what this could be. And I reached out on a Facebook group, a mother's Facebook group, and just sort of said, look, has anyone actually ever dealt with this? And by the grace of God, I had a mother who reached out to me privately and said, look, doing school drop off, I'll give you a call. And so she alerted me to the possibility of mold. So she also alerted me to a pediatrician who had helped them immensely with their daughter's issues, which was similar to my son's. So I guess, it did take a while, and there was a lot that happened in between that. There was times where I went to a renowned gastroenterologist who told me that there was no connection to the gut and the brain inflammation that my son was having, that I should put him on diabetes medication, that I should put him on AHD medication. There was all sorts of professionals that gave me the worst advice and off-label medications that they were trying to give him, which I look at now and go, oh my goodness, if I had done that, I would have been, one, probably causing him so much more issues, not addressing the root cause of why he was actually experiencing these things, and that we would have gone on for a long time and his body would have been more damaged. So thankfully, we found an amazing pediatrician, and we were able to identify through mycotoxin urine tests, and we've done oat tests, etc. And then obviously had my house inspected, and we confirmed that we had mold exposure, which we actually knew. We had a leak in our roof, which got fixed, which we found out it just got bleached and cleaned, essentially. So we knew we had mold exposure. We now knew that he had mycotoxins in his body, and the levels were incredible. So you would know, for accretoxin A, the markers, he should have been, for a normal level, should have been at 7.5 and below. His were at something like 366.
Woo!
Yeah, so really high. So I now know things like, genetic susceptibility. He can't, detox the same way from mold. He has been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called PANS. So this has been a journey for us. And so while I was learning all about this issue for my son, it felt very scary. It felt very unknown. And I just needed, for my own self and the way that I operate, I needed to understand as much as I possibly could. So I went and studied building biology, and specifically honed in on being a mold inspector, but it was for my own purpose, so that I could know what to look for, how to test for, how to help him. And then as I was going through my training and things, I noticed that on Facebook groups and things, mums were asking the same question, and I was able to chime in and give them some advice that I wish I'd gotten months and months before that. And so I realized very quickly that I was spending so much time helping all these people that I probably should do this as a job. And I finished my qualifications. I started the business, and quite literally it took off, and I have been booked out for 3 to 3.5 weeks in advance at all times ever since. Yeah. That is the demand in Sydney. That is the demand for parents knowing that there is something wrong, because we live in such a moldy city.
Yeah. Because COVID was 2020 and 2021. And then the year after that, 2022, that's when it rained and rained and rained.
Yep.
And that's when we got our leak. But I think that year would have, I would say, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say 60-70% of houses would have had some water damage that year, because it was intense. It didn't stop. And as you say, you knew you had a water leak, but you didn't correlate that to having mold. So then what did you do in your house once you found out that you had mold? What did you do? You moved. Yeah.
We did. But, again, at that point, when this very first happened and we identified that it was mold, I was not yet a qualified mold inspector. So I didn't have all of the knowledge. And what I know now about the difference between mold and mycotoxins makes a world of difference in terms of remediation and what you do with all your belongings. So for those of your followers who don't know, mycotoxins are the toxic compound that some molds produce. And it is the mycotoxins that make us sick and what we react to. So they are not a living thing. They cannot be killed. They need to be physically removed. So for us, we got out of the mold and we got rid of a lot of our stuff. We knew that we had to get rid of stuff, but we didn't understand the full extent. But we did get rid of a lot. We then moved into a new home. We spoke to the vendors who assured us, we told them everything, about our son, and they still assured us that there was no mold issue in that house. And within a few months of being there, it was very evident that this was a systemic, historical, long-term issue within that property that had been covered up for the process of, getting the property on the market. And so by this time, I was already deep into my course in building biology, and I was much more aware. I had a mold inspector come out and test the house, and she gave it the all clear.
Oh.
Yes. So I watched as she sort of looked around, put a sample machine in the middle of the room, took some samples, and gave us the all clear. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, we're in this thing. Maybe it's just he needs to heal. I remember having, some conversations with our pediatrician being like, we're doing everything. We're on all the supplements. We've changed his diet. He went to a gluten-free, grain-free, sugar-free, dairy-free diet, intense. We were doing all the things, but he still wasn't getting better. And I was in the middle of doing some work for my course, and I just had this compelling feeling to go and pull the dishwasher out. So I pulled the dishwasher out from thing, and I could see all the way along the back was toxic black mold. There was a leak in behind, and it was behind the cabinetry. So there's the wall, and then there's the back of the cabinetry, and it's in behind there, and it'd come back out through behind the dishwasher. So unless you know how to look properly for mold, it can hide in, the most amazing places. So sticking an air sample machine in the middle of a room is never going to find the mold. You've really got to, sort of dig deep. So, we moved, and then we had to go again. So that house was not safe. We did not have the money for full remediation of what was required for that level of contamination, because it wasn't just there. It was an older property with a very low subfloor to the ground with no ventilation, drainage issues. So moved again, lost everything we owned again, and then had to start afresh. And thankfully, in a house that has no mold, and I inspect it every few months, and we do. It's quite funny. My clients will often say, "Oh, I bet your house has no mold. I'd love to just come and live with you. What does your house look like?" And I laugh, and I sort of say, my husband and I are in our mid to late 40s, yet we live very much like students who have just moved out of home, because I have bare necessities, because I can't bear to lose everything again, and anything that I have has to be mold safe. So, all the throw rugs and cushions and soft furnishings and all the lovely stuff that we used to have, I can't bring myself to have that anymore. So,
And clutter's the worst. I mean, clutter is not your friend when you're trying to get on top of mold or dust.
100%. I think that's the biggest thing. People sort of say, what is the biggest thing with keeping your house free of mold? And I always say, get rid of the dust.
Yeah.
Make sure there's no moisture, and ventilation, airflow. So if you've got clutter, I go into clients' houses all the time, and cupboards and things are just full of dust. They're full of clutter. There's no airflow in there, and I pull the stuff out, and it's all moldy behind. All mold needs in a Sydney climate and Central Coast, Queensland, talking specifically in Australia, all it needs is some dust, which is the food source. It's the easiest possible food source for mold. Some moisture, which can just come from humidity. It can come from showering and having that condensation just waft out into the living space. And it needs poor conditions. If you're trying to control mold, ventilation, airflow around. So that's like some of the simplest things that you can do to protect your home from mold.
Yeah. My husband laughs at me because I used to not be able to go to sleep at night if the wardrobe door was open. Like for 20 years, if the wardrobe door is open, I wouldn't go to sleep.
Yeah.
And now I'm like keeping wardrobes open all the time. He's like, what happened to you? It's like mold happened to me.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a hard habit to break. I will go, for a long time, I would go past and close the wardrobes because that's what looks nice and neat and tidy. But now I keep them open a little bit all the time just for airflow, and I keep them very minimal, sort of no clutter.
I definitely need to improve on that. But how long have you been in this house?
Just over a year.
This mold-free house?
Just over
And
a
how
year.
is your son doing now?
Yeah. So look, I mean, PANS is a very complex condition. I believe that his PANS was triggered by just a storm of multiple events. He was a genetic susceptibility to start with. He was also a cesarean baby who was also put on a heavy dose of antibiotics at 3 weeks old, so disturbed his gut microbiome and his immune response. So he had a lot initially against him. And then we lived, if I think about it, we lived in a moldy house for a long time, you know, in those early years for him without really realizing. And then we have gone through this process over the last couple of years. But to be honest, he's really only been free of mold for just over a year. So I think, you know, the last time that we measured his ochratoxin, mycotoxin levels, they were at 14. So they have come down,
Okay.
you know, significantly. But I remember having this conversation with our pediatrician and sort of saying, why do we still get the flare ups? Why do we, you know, we've done everything. And she sort of looked at me and said, Tracey, it's amazing what you've done and how much that's come down, but it's still double. It's still double where ideally you would like it to be. But we're dealing with the historical and the systemic and the chronic inflammation in his body and the issues that have occurred as a result of what mold toxicity can do to you. It affects your immune system. It has caused him leaky gut. He has a dysregulated immune system. He has susceptibility now. His mast cells and things all react to mold. We can go into a hotel room, for example, and within half an hour, he can start having those neurological tics again. And it's because his body recognizes it and his immune response is not right. So look, where he is now from where he was is a world apart. He does still get flare-ups. And generally for us, we find that when there is something disturbed in his gut, so whether he's got an imbalance, like some sort of SIBO, a parasite, you know, it can be even really, really common things that most people get and are able to process naturally without symptoms. He cannot. And we notice there's a flare up in him most of the time. Once we look at that, we address it, we control it, and he comes good again. So for us, he is worlds away from where he was. You know, he was OCD, had to count repetitively, had to touch smooth surfaces, high level of anxiety where he couldn't go to bed without crying and legitimately scared to go to bed, you know, an unrealistic anxiety and sense of fear. The neurological tics, the vocal tics, motor tics, etc. So from where he was to where he is now, and we just have to manage those flares as they come, you know, worlds apart. And as I said, we've realistically only been completely mold free for about a year and a bit. So yeah. I think, you know, the prognosis long term, I think, is good, I hope. But, you know, I think that's actually probably something that, you know, would be great for your clients to understand as well. If you are dealing with mold toxicity, it is not just about getting out of the mold and suddenly you're better. You know, yeah. I get a lot of clients who are like, okay, so if we get out and we're good, we should be right. But the truth is, and I've lived this firsthand, is that the body takes a long time to recover from mold toxicity in a lot of cases. And, you know, certain symptoms might die down, might go away, but depending on your genetic susceptibility, depending on any autoimmune conditions you developed, depending on the time that you were exposed to toxic mold, they can all play a role in healing the body afterwards. Getting out of the mold is just one of the first steps.
Yeah, it's step one. But doing the test that you talked about, the mycotoxin test, is really good because it says, is it MPA? Is it ochratoxin? And then whoever you're working with can actually tailor a treatment plan specifically for that mycotoxin because different binders, different treatment plans will be good for different things. And I find with the kids that I see with PANS and have had prior mold exposure, it's exactly what you said. They're 80% better, but they still go up and down because they're dysregulated. So for most kids, I find it's just viruses. They just become extremely susceptible to viruses and dysregulation because of the viruses.
Yeah.
You can manage with things like vitamin A, vitamin D, and like really going hard at the first sign of a virus.
I think that's important too. You know, yes, the kids, you know, they might get to 80%, but for the parents, and I speak this from experience, to not feel completely disheartened when you take a few steps forward to come a few steps back, because that is a reality of mold exposure. And not just for PANS kids, many adults who deal with toxic mold have the same sort of recovery process as well. And I think I say to all of my clients, because pretty much every client I go to, I find mold. And it's because they've got health issues which are triggering them or alerting to them to the fact that there's mold. They've seen it. So the probability that I will find mold is quite high when I go there. But I always encourage them to work with a functional medicine practitioner who is able to run these tests. These are not tests that the GPs will willingly offer or provide. I quite often hear from clients, oh, well, I know I got a blood test and they said I wasn't allergic to mold. Great.
Yeah.
But you don't need to be allergic to mold for it to be wreaking havoc on your body. Yeah. So I always say to my clients, look, show your functional wellness practitioner my report. Show them what molds were in high levels. Are they tertiary colonizers? Are they just, sort of allergenic molds? Like what was there? Because they can help you then to run these mycotoxins tests and you have a baseline.
Yeah.
A baseline to healing, a baseline to go, this is where I was at when I was living in mold. And then how you heal from that will be the best thing, because I think it's really important. Like I mentioned earlier, 3.5 years later, my son's level is still at 14, but it's come from the hundreds. If I didn't have a baseline to start from, I would just be thinking, why is he not better yet? And sort of maybe doubting the process. So I think you've got to see those numbers coming down. You've got to see improvement.
Yeah. And talking of adults, I went to Ireland last year and stayed in a house where I could see mold, but I had no choice. I had to stay there. And when I came back to Australia, I was achy, I was sore, so I went for a blood test. And my Epstein-Barr virus, which had been dormant for 30 years, had reactivated. My liver enzymes were through the roof, everything. And just living in that moldy environment again had just allowed for the triggering of that Epstein-Barr. It took me 6 months and many vitamin C infusions to actually recover from that as well.
Wow.
And I'd been fine for 30 years, so it wasn't something that was just normal for me.
Yeah.
And so you've talked about genetic susceptibility quite a lot. Have you looked at like your son's HLA genes? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So does he have the gene for celiac disease?
Not for celiac, no.
No.
He has, now this is where it goes a little bit out of my pay scale, but he has the genetic haliotype, I think it's called, which makes him more susceptible to mold.
Yeah. I think that's great to know as well, because people will often say, well, there's 5 in the family. How come only one of us is sick? Like this doesn't ring true. But that's why. It's because although you're in the same family, you don't have the exact same genetics. So some person, like one person in the family, is just more susceptible.
It's probably something that I deal with quite often. And, offline, you and I touched on this a little bit, is that, I've somehow inadvertently become a mold inspector for families who are dealing with this. And quite often, it's not always just the mum or just the dad, but quite often it's the mum who I'm connecting with. She knows something's up, but dad might be sort of saying, well, we're all fine. I feel fine. If it was a problem, we'd all be sick. And that's just such a big misconception. It is probably one thing that keeps families sick for a long time, because they don't understand that one person can have a reaction to mold when everyone else's bodies are processing it in a different way.
And even within a family, people can react completely differently. So my daughter had severe acne, that was her symptom. But at the same time, my son's dust mite allergy escalated and was just through the roof. Like his readings for his dust mite allergy were through the roof at the same time. But again, it took me a long time to correlate that this was all the same problem. It's all just mold. So again, it's just that dysregulation of his immune system.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes I've gone out and done mold inspections and they might have a little bit of mold, but a lot of dust. And I sort of say to people, look, you need to understand that mold lives in, travels through, consumes dust. If you have dust, you have a degree of mold in your home. But sometimes it's actually not the mold that person is struggling with from a health perspective. It's the dust. So, yes, you've got to keep your house dust-free from a mold perspective, but sometimes it's the dust mites and things that are absolutely wreaking havoc on that person's immune system.
Yeah, I see that so much. I don't know if it's just because of the clients I'm dealing with or if it's just an actual escalation, but I see such severe dust mite allergies in children.
Yeah.
So what would be the red flags that you think people should be aware of, to think this might be mold?
Look, I mean, I guess The issue that we have with mold toxicity and mold illness is that so many of these symptoms can easily be put down to something else. And that's why I guess it gets misdiagnosed quite often as well. So I would say if you have been having a recurring issue, your child, since moving into a new home, maybe has experienced an increase in asthmatic symptoms. Maybe they've always had asthma, but mold exposure can really exacerbate those symptoms, for example, or eczema. If you feel like you get better when you're away from the home, that's a red flag. Just sort of say something's not right when I'm at home versus I'm on holidays here, and yes, okay, it's lovely sunshine, etc., but my body feels better. If there's something that just you've had repetitive prescriptions for, or you've gone and you've given all of your symptoms, brain fog, itchy eyes, gut issues, food sensitivities, behavioural issues, sudden increases in anxiety for the kids, whatever that might be. If you've gone to a doctor and they've done all your bloods and things and they say everything looks normal, but that that's not normal and it shouldn't be normal, that would be the time that I would start looking around the house. And anyone who follows my Instagram, Break the Mould Inspections, would be able to have a look at what I actually find in people's houses. Sometimes I have inspected the most beautiful, beautiful multi-million-dollar properties. And as soon as I take my high-power flashlight and I actually look at all of their furniture and things, it is covered in mold, and they had no idea. And these are beautiful, immaculate homes, not dirty, they're not messy, expensive furniture, but covered. And so my advice would be, if you cannot get an answer for your health issues, or you feel like something's wrong, speak to a functional wellness practitioner, get a mold inspection in the house, and then you can just pair up the two and sort of work on that healing journey.
Because I think people feel judged. Like when I say, "Do you have any mold in your home?" People are like, "I do not have any mold in my home." It's like it's a judgment on your, domestic goddess skills. But
Yeah.
it's about the water ingress, isn't it? It's about the leaks,
It's
the floods, the dishwasher, like you said.
humidity.
Yeah. And the thing that catches people out as well is the mold on the inside of wardrobes that I didn't realize was mold. Nobody realizes that kind of orange speckling on the inside of
Yeah.
the wardrobe door is mold.
Yeah, that's a big one. I find that nearly every house I go to. And even, the mirrored glass sliding wardrobe doors,
Yeah.
no one looks on the other side of them
Yeah.
except for me. So, take your flashlight. I just tell people all the time. I mean, my husband had a laugh the other day because I was doing my housework, but I was doing it with a flashlight. And the reason is because when you shine the flashlight on surfaces underneath shelves and things, you can see mold that is relatively transparent in a lot of cases, but when you shine a torch perpendicular to that surface, you can actually see it there. It actually brings itself, to the forefront of your vision. So the stuff that people don't realize, they're like, oh, it's a bit orange, because they're thinking mold and mold toxicity has to be this big, black, ugly, dirty home sort of situation, which is so not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, we had it all, to be honest. We also had the black mold outside the windows, but we had a lot of that kind of orange transparent mold as well. Um,
Mm.
so one of my friends recently did some DIY testing, and then she did some DIY remediation on her house. And I spoke to her a few months later. I said, "How did that all go?" She said, "Yeah, the mold is back." So tell me about,
Yeah.
DIY mold testing and your opinions on that.
Mm. Okay, so I get this a lot. Clients who do a DIY test in maybe one of those Petri dishes or something like that. The way that those agar systems work, you put something in there, it will grow. And the longer you leave it, it will just continue to grow and grow and grow. That tells you nothing. It does not tell you what species of mold it is or genre of mold it is, which doesn't tell you if it's mycotoxin producing. It doesn't tell you where the mold has come from. It doesn't tell you why. So a big part of sort of what we do as mold inspectors, it doesn't mean that I don't just turn up to someone's house and have a look around. There's so much that goes into it. I talk to the client about their history. Have you had a history of leaks? I research the property online. Has it been involved in a fire previously and been flooded? Has it had flooding from the rains? Things like that. So there's research that goes into it before I even step foot into the client's home. By doing those self-tests, and we sort of touched on it briefly before, you cannot just put an air sample machine or swipe one little surface. Swiping one little surface won't do anything. You need to be able to quantify the data that you've got as well in comparison to what is outside, what is naturally in the environment outside and in what levels. Then when we come inside the house, what does that look like in rank order? Do those molds then suddenly inside the house become number one, those water damaged building molds? So the number one job of our role is to find the source and then to identify where those molds are, sort of present, what level of contamination and what needs to be done to safely remediate. If you are like most people, you will think, okay, I've found mold and now I'm going to rip it out or I'm going to go and spray it with exit mold or, sort of some sort of biocide, vinegar, whatever that might be. You are doing so much more damage. So in proper remediation, according to the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning and Restoration certification, you need to remove mold under containment. So let's say, for example, you have found mold because of a leak and it's under your vanity unit. That room needs to be completely contained because mold spores and mycotoxins are so microscopic that as soon as you disturb them, they're just going to flee out a whole heap more. And they're going to, if you've sprayed them with something, try and kill them, they're going to break down into even smaller pieces, which are even more easily inhaled and able to be absorbed by the body. So you're just going to spread them throughout the house. Containment is number one. You need to make sure that that area is contained, and you need to be able to make sure that you're not removing more, you're not putting more of that mold throughout the rest of the house that's just going to go and seed and potentially, cause more damage. So I know that for a lot of people, they see the mold and they just want to get it out. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a natural instinct to go, what's here, we've got to get rid of it, but it's got to be done the right way. And a mold inspector who does their job properly will not just find the mold for you because you've had a little swab. They will find, sort of, is there a systemic issue throughout this house? Is humidity a problem throughout this whole house? Just because you did a swab in your daughter's bedroom who has allergies and it came back positive on the little petri dish, that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about that home. It doesn't tell you that humidity is a chronic issue within this home. Ventilation is an issue. You've really got to look at so much more than just a little swab. And I do, I have clients who talk about, I just want an ERMI. I just want you to do a dust test and ERMI. And look, ERMIs have a place. They are the dust swabs where you go around the house and you take dust samples from all over the house, and then they break it down and they analyze the DNA of it. And they can tell you, yes, you've had cotomium, or yes, you've had aspergillus, etc. The issue with that is that it does not tell you where the mold has come from. It'll say, this house has got mold or has had mold. It's got the DNA of mold being here. But, that could be because the people who moved out before you had moldy contents.
Yeah.
It could be that, it's a problem in a bathroom, but you're then left going, okay, I've just spent $500 on this ERMI that tells me I've got mold somewhere or had mold somewhere. But where is it now? And you go right back to where you started, which is having to get a proper mold inspector to come in and analyze your whole house.
A proper mold inspector will then tell you, okay, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like give you the list of jobs that you need to do to address the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, I get asked all the time, okay, we've identified the mold. Can you clean it? Can you fix it? Do you do the remediation? And I always say to them, no, it's not actually in your best interest to have a mold inspector who also does that. You want to know that when you have an inspection on your home, that person is telling you everything that needs to be done, giving you options of what you can do without there being money to be made in it for them on the restoration works.
Yeah.
And I think it's about really working with your client as well. And this is why, there's a lot of unpaid hours in this job for anyone that's wanting to be a mold inspector. Yes, we get paid to be on site, but then there's hours of report writing, hours of analysing the data that we've got from the inspection as well as the lab reports, but then helping coaching our clients through what to do now. Yeah. It's fine to say you've got mold, but what can they do? And I find that, for me, I need to look at each client's individual situation. They may not have the money to go and do these full major remediation works. there is instances where it's just better just to light a match and burn the place down. It is that bad. But not everyone can do that, and not everyone needs that. But, it's about providing them in their report. This is the, sort of first level, top shelf of what you should do if you can afford to. And if you can't do that, what can you do? What steps can you do to improve your indoor air quality as best you can, given your situation and your circumstances?
Yeah. I think one of the misconceptions as well is people think, oh, no, I've got a new house, it's fine. But having a new house does not mean that you're fine, because
Yeah.
whenever those houses are being built, they're still exposed to the elements. And if that moisture is built into the house, then you're
Yep.
back in the same position.
I cannot tell you honestly how many inspections I've done where the house is either in the getting built stage, renovation stage. So a lot of older properties in like sort of that inner Sydney area, they're old historic properties that are being gutted. And the rains have come and the builders haven't had it secure, and the walls are covered in mold and water damage. There's water all over the floors, and they're just sort of saying, oh, well, we'll just dry it out and we'll sand it and, paint it. And buildings which are, sort of the frames go up, they're left in the rain for long periods of time. The sun comes out and the building company goes, great, we can get back to work, and up the walls go. And that was not dried out enough to, sort of ensure that there's not. So this mold is just growing in the walls behind the scenes without these poor people having any clue.
Yeah, I'm so super alert to that now. Like when I see like buildings, I'm going, no, get it watertight, please.
It's so funny because you say that, because you can't unsee what you know. So I can't go for a drive. I can't take the dog for a walk without looking at people's houses going, oh, that's problematic.
So tell me where we can find you, what sort of areas you work in, and what to do next if you've been listening to this podcast and think, oh my God.
Sure. So obviously you can go to my website, www.breakthemouldinspections.com.au. You can go to my Instagram at Break The Mould Inspections and reach out for an appointment. I generally work predominantly in Sydney. I do travel Greater Sydney. I go to, places like up to Newcastle, down as far as sort of Wollongong and the South Coast. I do definitely try to help as many people as I can, but, predominantly we're in and around Sydney. I think I've said to you earlier, I have been hired to go interstate for other places, but, there is a cost with that. So, for most people, if you live sort of within 2 hours of Sydney, I'm generally able to help you.
I recorded a podcast with Eliza Song a few weeks ago, so it's kind of one of the previous podcasts to this one, and all about pans, and we touched on mold in that as well. So I guess if you've been listening to this and think pans, that sounds like my kid, go back and listen to the Eliza Song one as well. Any final like thoughts that you want to share with people who might be listening?
Sure. Not every house has mold that needs to be, extensively renovated, and it's not going to cost a fortune for every house. There are small, simple steps that people can take to clean and remove mold. The biggest problem that I see is people trying to kill mold. Do not try and kill mold. Mold needs to be physically removed. So if it is in certain parts of building materials that can't be cleaned off, then, that needs to be physically removed. If you are seeing it in, sort of windowsills and bathrooms and things like that, you can effectively clean these, but you want to physically remove it. So we're talking about microfiber cloths with a bit of dish soap, physically lifting the mold off of the surface, not trying to kill it. So I guess that's my biggest thing. Please don't try and kill mold. The goal is to always physically remove mold.
And I tell people to go to Bunnings and get they sell like 1 million of those microfiber cloths. But then I tell people to just chuck them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I go through so many packets of these things myself, but I'm not removing physical mold, but it's what I say to my clients. Look, okay, you have mold on these surfaces here. We've identified that, we don't need professional remediation, or you just want to keep up on top of these things. Like for some clients, the top of their fridge is really dusty and I can see that it's got mold in there as well. So we don't need to chuck out the fridge for that. We don't need a big professional remediation for that. We just need to physically remove that mold. And it's just a case of getting those microfiber cloths, getting a bit of the dish soap water, wiping along the surface, folding the cloth, wiping back, not rubbing, bin that cloth, never to be seen again. For $8 at Bunnings for a big pack of those 20 cloths, it's money well spent.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think I think a lot of people will be listening to this and getting in touch with you. So thanks very much for taking the time to record it with me today.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Holistic Health for Happy Kids. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring on your journey to raise thriving, healthy little ones. Remember, small, consistent changes can lead to big transformations. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at The Pediatric Naturopath for more tips, tools, and inspiration. If you've got a question or a topic you'd love to hear about, please send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep supporting your kids in the most natural, nurturing ways possible.